Hi everyone, it's so great to be able to share with you today in this Beatitude series. We're up to the 7th Beatitude, which is blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. That word peace, I think it connotates very different images in all of our minds, depending on our experiences, our age, what walk of life we're in at the moment. If you've grown up in Christian circles or you know a lot of Bible stories, you might think about Jesus out on the lake and the storm comes and he calms that storm and says, "Peace, be still." And so maybe the image of stillness, of calm, of the absence of chaos is what you think about when you hear the word peace. For others of us, maybe you're a bit like me, you have children or grandchildren or you work with children, and the word peace connotates something a little different. We might have in our heads that saying, "I just want some peace and quiet." And so for us, sometimes peace is quietness and serenity, and maybe even being left alone for a little bit with our thoughts and having some space. For other people, they might come from places in which there is violent conflict. And so peace signals something very different. It's the absence of conflict, the absence of violence, and the hope for healing. Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers," and that word peace that's used is the Hebrew word shalom. And shalom is such a rich word that is used all throughout the Bible in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And this word shalom signifies wholeness, restoration, harmony. And it really points to how the world was designed to be by God in the first place. And it points to what God's reign and rule on this earth looks like. Shalom is the state in which the world was meant to be. It's the best description of God's reign, a place of safety and justice, truth, a place of trust, inclusion and love, a place of joy and of happiness and of well-being. And Jesus uses this word when he speaks to the disciples. He uses it on the lake with the storm, shalom, be still. He uses it before he goes to the cross and he says to his disciples, "My peace, my shalom, I leave with you." And when he is resurrected, he meets the disciples in Luke, at the end of Luke, and he says, "Peace be with you, shalom be with you," because they were terrified. Paul also, he exhorts the communities he writes to be about making shalom, making peace, because it was about unity within their communities. Shalom and being a shalom maker means being and acting as the image of God here on earth. And so much of making peace is on God's agenda, that Jesus says those who are about making peace are God's children. They're chips off the old block. They are sons and daughters of God. To be peacemakers, though, we have to actually recognize that there's conflict and be willing to step in and lean into the conflict. We don't need peacemakers if there's no conflict. What's the point? And so we have to realize that our calling is to step into and to lean into conflict to bring about reconciliation. We have to ask ourselves, are there people that we have placed on an us versus them spectrum? Because that's how we kind of know where the conflict lands. We do it all the time as humans. We like to divide and make boundaries. My family, my religion, my ethnicity, my sports team. We make these boundaries and these lines, and we create an us and a them. And this is what creates conflict. But Jesus' way of making peace was to bridge and cross those divides, to step over those lines that we'd made. He was all about peacemaking. He interacted and ate with sinners. He touched the unclean, those who were diseased. He interacted with women in public. He even made them his closest associates, and they were considered at such a low level of society. He loved the children and he welcomed them in. They too were also considered less than. Jesus was about bridging and crossing these divides. What if we could find a way to bridge these divides, to stand on common ground? Because the Beatitude doesn't say, blessed are the peaceful. It says, blessed are the peacemakers, those who actively pursue peace, who actively pursue wholeness, restoration, and harmony. This Beatitude is like the culmination of all of the previous ones gone before, and it's in action. Peacemaking is stepping into and leaning into conflict, but doing so with generosity and in humility. It's with a heart that mourns for the pain and the loss that has occurred and seeks justice to make it right. It's an act of mercy and compassion towards another person, and it is with a heart that is right and pure. Peacemaking is this culmination of all of the Beatitudes to bring about reconciliation. And so, faced with this encouragement of being the very image of this shalom-making God, we have to ask ourselves, where is the conflict in our own lives? We can look at conflict on a macro level in the world and say, yeah, we want to be about peace throughout the world. But the thing about these Beatitudes was it was all about these interpersonal relationships. And so where is the conflict within our own relationships that we need to bring peace to? We kind of know where those conflicts are or who they're with because we get this feeling in the pit of our stomach. Maybe when you hear their name or you see them. It's like our body physically responds to the conflict. And maybe it's from losing touch over time and you hear their name, you think, I should be in contact. Maybe there's been disappointment and unmet expectations in relationships. Maybe you have broken a promise or wronged someone and you know that you need to be about seeking forgiveness and making amends. Our body tells us when maybe there's conflict and encourages us to do something about it. But this isn't easy. And I really struggle with doing this. I am not a confrontational person. I physically withdraw when there's conflict. I feel myself shrinking in. I go quiet. I worry that the things that might come out of my mouth won't be the right thing. And so I quiet myself. I'm silent. I withdraw. But the thing about peacemaking is that it's about leaning in. I know that I do this. I put my hand up and I stop myself. And I stop others when I'm in conflict. But this Beatitude invites us into the embrace, to embrace the other, to bring about peacemaking. I have friends who are really great at this. They're great at it because they've practiced a lot at pursuing and actively pursuing peace in their relationships. They willingly step into the conflict, as uncomfortable as it might be, to make sure that their relationships are healthy and whole. And I've been on the receiving end of this. I have a beautiful friend who, from one interaction, she knew that something wasn't right between us. And my natural inclination is to just withdraw and go, it'll be fine one day. I'll get over it and just move on. But she beautifully and humbly contacted me and was like, no, I want to make sure that we're okay. And she actively pursued peace. She had the courage and it was liberating. But it was also a real moment of vulnerability for her, but also for the one that receives, for me. To be the one who receives that peacemaking, it's vulnerable because we also then have to come to terms with our role in making peace. Mark Scandrette gives us some practices within our own personal relationships to think about, to reach out and reconnect and realign with those whom we might have conflict, to reconcile with those that we have wronged, to cross the boundaries to connect, and to avoid that us versus them language in our own minds when we think about them, and with other people if we talk about it. To not make it become an us versus them, but to seek the common ground. And so, what about in our church community? In the church in general? How does being peacemakers apply to the church? In Mark 9:49-50, Jesus says to his disciples, "Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can you make it salty again? Have salt among yourselves and be at peace with each other." And I think sometimes that metaphor of salt throws us. We don't really understand what's salt got to do with making peace. In this chapter, in chapter 9, Jesus has to confront his disciples a few times and pull them up because their behaviour was the opposite of peacemaking. They were bickering amongst themselves. They were choosing fights with other people, telling other people they can't use Jesus' name to cast out demons. And Jesus says, hang on a minute. If they're not against us, then they're for us. He brings in a child and says, the children, the kingdom belongs to them. And woe to anybody who makes them stumble. Jesus teaches his disciples that peacemaking, that being about unity is vital. And he finishes by saying, have salt among yourselves and be at peace with each other. Because the thing with salt back in ancient culture was it was vital for life. In the winter months in these poor villages, the only way they could survive and have enough protein to eat was because they had fish that was preserved in salt. And so they needed it. It was necessary for life because the salt preserved what was good for their bodies and good for the village. And so here Jesus says, be the salt, be the thing that preserves the goodness to bring about life. And so for us as a church community, what can we do to be about preserving what is good and brings life amongst our community? To make sure that we are living in unity and harmony, that we are the salt, we are the preservers of what is good. Paul also says this in a different way, and he kind of highlights the opposite of peacemaking. He says it to the Galatians. He says, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbour as yourself. If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. He goes on to describe the evidence of living in the flesh, or is his way of saying living in sin. And here he kind of notes the opposite of what it means to be about shalom making and peacemaking. He says that living in this way produces jealousy, discord, and dissension. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. And so when we take this principle of being peacemakers, actively seeking wholeness and restoration and harmony within our personal relationships, within the relationships of our church community and the church in general, we then can take it out to the broader community. And we think about who are the groups that make us feel, we have not done a good job at bringing about peace. For myself, I think about the LGBT community. The church has done a pretty bad job at being peacemakers to these people. I think about refugees. I think about our Indigenous First Nations people. We've not done a good job in the past of being reconcilers, of bringing wholeness and restoration to these people. And so we as the church, we as individuals, we need to be looking at our broader community and thinking, how do we cross the divide? And crossing the divide is not easy. In fact, in both Mark and Matthew, they highlight how hard it was to actually get to the ethnic side. Every time Jesus and the disciples went to cross the lake, cross over to the 10 cities that were not considered the Jewish cities, every time they crossed, there was always something that went wrong. There was a storm, there was the threat of losing their lives. Every time they crossed over, it was hard. But Jesus was always there, and they still went across. And there were miracles and healing and restoration. And every time they came back, it was easy. It's easy to come back to your own people. But that crossing the divide is hard, but that's what Jesus calls us to do. And he does so and empowers us to do so by the Spirit. And all of this, the peacemaking, it requires sacrifice from us. It requires us to forego our comfort and sacrifice for the sake of someone else. And when we do, we actually build trust. Being peacemakers, wanting to see a better outcome for somebody else, may require us to sacrifice our comfort, to lay it down for the betterment of someone else, but in doing so, we create trust. I know with my friend, when she came and she wanted to make peace, and she did that, I know that it pushed her out of her comfort zone. It was uncomfortable for her, but I also know that I trust her. I trust her with my relationship because I know that she wants the best for me, and so do I for her. But that's come because I know that she's willing to sacrifice what might be easy to make sure that our relationship is good. Imagine if we had that same approach with the groups out in the community, if they knew that we were willing to sacrifice what's comfortable for us in order to bring about peace and the trust that can come, and where restoration and healing can really begin. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who step into conflict, who lean in to the painful situations, and in bearing the image of God, bring about wholeness. Blessed are those who in generosity and in humility grieve with those who are in pain and seek justice. Blessed are those who know themselves to be seen and loved by God, and in doing so, see the other through eyes of mercy and compassion. These are the children of God. So can I encourage you today to perhaps move from a posture of leaning back and away from conflict, but reaching out, moving into reaching out and reconciling. Cross boundaries to connect with the other. Avoid using us and them language, because we all stand on common ground as sons and daughters of God.